I was a shy new employee. I saw a deaf old man being ignored in our lobby, so I greeted him in sign language. I had no idea my wife's father, the CEO, was watching, or who that man was. Let me paint you a picture of corporate mediocrity. My name is Marcus Grant. I'm 27 years old, and when I joined Titan Global 3 years ago, I was basically human furniture, the kind that nobody notices until it squeaks or breaks. You know that guy who sits in meetings taking notes that nobody will ever read? That's me. The guy who brings homemade sandwiches wrapped in tinfoil, like it's still 1985? Also me. The guy who gets blamed when the printer jams, even though I haven't touched the damn thing since last Tuesday. Bingo, Marcus Grant, professional scapegoat. I swear, sometimes I think I could show up to work dressed as a banana, and people would just assume it was casual Friday. My cubicle is strategically placed in what I like to call the Bermuda Triangle of corporate America, that dead zone between the break room and the bathroom where ambition goes to die. It's the perfect spot for someone whose biggest achievement at work is knowing exactly how many packets of sugar the office coffee needs to taste like something other than battery acid. Spoiler alert, it's 4 packets, and even then it still tastes like disappointment. But here's the kicker. My wife Clara works here too, and she's basically the office equivalent of Wonder Woman if Wonder Woman wore power suits and could make grown men cry with a single PowerPoint presentation. Clara Grant, née Wilson, is the golden child of Titan Global's marketing department. She's confident, sharp as a tack, and so beautiful that I sometimes catch myself staring at her across the office wondering how the hell I convinced her to marry me. I'm talking lottery ticket level lucky here, folks. The thing is, being married to the office superstar when you're barely office furniture creates this weird dynamic where everyone knows exactly who I am, but nobody knows what I actually do. Oh, you're Clara's husband, they say, like it explains everything about my existence. Translation: oh, you're the guy who somehow tricked the hottest woman in accounting into saying I do. They look at me like I'm some sort of con artist who's about to be exposed any day now. And honestly, sometimes I feel like they're not wrong. Clara's coworkers have this way of talking to me that makes it crystal clear they think I'm punching way above my weight class. They'll say things like, "Marcus, you're so lucky to have Clara," with this tone that really means, "How did you fool her into marrying you? And when is she going to come to her senses?" It's like being a contestant on a game show where everyone knows the answer except you. And the answer is that you don't belong here. The worst part is that Clara doesn't even seem to notice. She's always been ambitious, driven, focused on climbing that corporate ladder like it's Mount Everest, and she's going for the world record. Meanwhile, I'm over here trying to figure out if the elevator music is the same tune every day or if I'm slowly losing my mind. She talks about quarterly reports and market penetration strategies while I'm mentally calculating whether I have enough leftover meatloaf for tomorrow's lunch. Don't get me wrong, I love my wife. I'm crazy about her. But being married to someone who's basically corporate royalty while you're the court jester without the funny hat is exhausting. At company parties, she networks like she's running for president while I hover by the snack table, trying to look busy. People approach our little corner of the party, shake her hand enthusiastically, then give me this polite nod like I'm her +1 who she felt sorry for. The irony is that I actually went to college. I have a degree in communications, which in retrospect is about as useful as a chocolate teapot in the corporate world. I thought communications meant I'd be good at, communicating. Turns out it mostly qualifies me to nod knowingly during meetings while secretly wondering if anyone else notices that half our corporate buzzwords are just regular words with "ife" or "ization" stuck on the end. My daily routine at Titan Global is about as thrilling as watching paint dry in slow motion. I arrive at 8:47 a.m. every day, not 8:45, not 8:50, but 8:47, because that's exactly how long it takes me to grab coffee from the lobby Starbucks and pretend I'm not procrastinating. I sit down at my desk, which is decorated with exactly 2 personal items: a framed photo of Clara looking gorgeous at our wedding, and a small cactus named Fernando who's somehow the most successful thing in my cubicle since he's managed to stay alive for 8 months. I spend my morning answering emails that could have been text messages, attending meetings that could have been emails, and creating reports that nobody will read, but everyone insists we need for documentation purposes. It's like being trapped in an episode of The Office, except less funny and with worse coffee. Lunch is always the highlight of my day, and not because the food is good. It's because it's the 1 hour where I can stop pretending to be busy. I eat my Tupperware lunch, usually leftovers that Clara made because she's amazing at everything, including cooking, while reading articles on my phone about people who quit their corporate jobs to become travel bloggers or goat farmers. I live vicariously through strangers on the internet who had the guts to escape the fluorescent-lit purgatory that is modern office life. The afternoon is just the morning in reverse. More meetings, more emails, more reports, more nodding at presentations that make my soul die a little inside. By 5:30 p.m., I'm practically sprinting to the elevator, not because I hate my job exactly, but because I hate feeling invisible in my own life. And that's the thing nobody talks about when you're the background character in your own story. It's not that people are mean to you. They're just indifferent. You become part of the scenery, like the motivational posters nobody reads, or the plastic plants that everyone assumes are real until they try to water them. You smile, you wave, you make small talk about the weather, but you might as well be a well-dressed ghost haunting the corporate world. So yeah, that's me, Marcus Grant, professional nobody, married to somebody amazing, working somewhere that pays me enough to afford a decent apartment and a reliable car, but not enough to feel like I matter. Living the American dream, one forgettable day at a time. Little did I know, everything was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. So here's the thing about being professionally mediocre. People love to remind you of your limitations. If you asked anyone at Titan Global what Marcus Grant was good at, they'd probably say stapling documents with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, or maybe nodding enthusiastically during PowerPoint presentations like I'm watching the director's cut of Citizen Kane instead of Q3 revenue projections, a journey through spreadsheet hell. My coworkers have this adorable habit of treating me like I'm some kind of office savant whose special power is knowing where they keep the good pens and which vending machine doesn't eat your dollar bills. Oh, Marcus will know. They say when someone can't figure out how to unjam the copier, as if mechanical aptitude is somehow coded into my DNA along with an inexplicable ability to remember everyone's coffee preferences. But here's what nobody at Titan Global knows about me, and I mean absolutely nobody. I'm fluent in American Sign Language. Not just hello and thank you level fluent, but full-blown conversational, joke-cracking, can translate aided argument about politics fluent. It's like having a superpower that nobody knows about, except instead of flying or shooting lasers from my eyes, I can communicate silently with my hands while everyone else assumes I'm just gesticulating wildly because I had too much coffee. The story of how I learned ASL isn't exactly what you'd call heroic. It started when I was 15 and my Aunt Linda had a baby named Leo. Cute kid, chubby cheeks, that whole deal. Except Leo was born profoundly deaf. While the rest of my family was doing that thing where they speak really loudly and slowly like volume is somehow going to cure deafness, I figured maybe I should actually learn how to talk to the kid properly. Okay, fine. That's the noble version. The real reason I started learning sign language was because I was a hormone-addled teenager who thought it would be cool and mysterious. I had this ridiculous fantasy that I'd meet some gorgeous deaf girl who would be so impressed by my signing skills that she'd fall madly in love with me. Picture 16-year-old Marcus practicing fingerspelling in the mirror, convinced he was going to be the romantic hero of some indie film about breaking down communication barriers through the power of love and hand gestures. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Turns out, learning a whole language just to impress hypothetical girls is not a foolproof dating strategy. Who knew? But what started as teenage delusions of romantic grandeur turned into something actually meaningful. Leo and I developed this incredible bond that none of my other cousins had with him. While they were awkwardly waving at family gatherings or trying to include him in conversations he couldn't follow, Leo and I were cracking jokes, sharing secrets, and having those deep philosophical discussions that only happen between a deaf 8-year-old and his slightly less mature teenage cousin. Leo taught me that sign language isn't just moving your hands around. It's a completely visual way of thinking. The grammar is different, the expressions are more dramatic, and honestly, some of the signs are hilarious when you think about them literally. The sign for boring looks like you're drilling into your nostril with your index finger, which is probably the most accurate representation of boredom ever created. By the time I got to college, I was taking ASL classes as electives, partly because I genuinely loved the language and partly because they were way easier than organic chemistry. My professors were always surprised by how quickly I picked up new vocabulary and complex grammatical structures, not realizing I'd been practicing with an 8-year-old drill sergeant who had no patience for my sloppy hand shapes. The really cool thing about being fluent in ASL is that it's like being part of this secret club that exists everywhere, but is invisible to most people. I could be sitting in a restaurant and spot a conversation happening 3 tables over, or catch someone complaining about their boss in the elevator, and nobody around me would have any idea what was going on. It's like having subtitles for real life, except only I can read them. But in the corporate world, ASL is about as valuable as knowing how to juggle flaming torches or recite Shakespeare backwards. Nobody at Titan Global cares that I can communicate fluently with roughly 500,000 Americans who use sign language as their primary mode of communication. They care about pivot tables and synergy and whether I can format a document so it looks more professional, which apparently means changing the font from Times New Roman to Calibri and calling it innovation. The irony is that I work for a communications company that prides itself on connecting people and breaking down barriers, but they've never once considered that maybe, just maybe, some of those barriers are literal communication barriers that could be solved by having someone on staff who speaks more than one language, even if that second language happens to use hands instead of vocal cords. Clara knows I can sign, obviously, but she's never really seen it as anything more than a cute party trick. Oh, Marcus knows sign language. She'll mention casually when it comes up in conversation, the same way she might say, "Oh, Marcus can whistle really loudly." It's just another random fact about her quirky husband who collects useless skills like some people collect vintage spoons. The thing is, I'm actually pretty damn good at it. I've been interpreting for Leo at family events for over a decade now, and I volunteer sometimes at the community center downtown where they have social events for deaf and hard-of-hearing adults. I can keep up with rapid-fire conversations about everything from sports to politics to that weird dream someone had about being chased by a giant sandwich. I can translate jokes while maintaining the timing that makes them actually funny, which is harder than it sounds. But at work, I'm still just the guy who knows how to fix the printer when it gets moody and makes that grinding noise that sounds like it's plotting revenge against humanity. I'm the guy who remembers to water the office plants and can tell you exactly which bathroom has the good toilet paper. I'm the guy who married way out of his league and somehow convinced the most competent woman in the building to share a health insurance plan with him. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just casually dropped my ASL skills into conversation at work. "Hey Bob, I couldn't help but notice you're struggling with that diversity initiative. Have you considered accessibility for deaf and hard-of-hearing employees? Because I happen to be fluent in sign language and could totally help with that." But then I remember that Bob barely acknowledges my existence when I'm standing right in front of him. So the chances of him caring about my hidden linguistic talents are somewhere between slim and non-existent. So I keep my superpower to myself, tucked away like Clark Kent's cape, waiting for the day when someone might actually need what I have to offer. Until then, I'll just keep being the office furniture with a secret. Tuesday morning at Titan Global started like every other Tuesday, with me desperately trying to convince myself that the week was almost half over while simultaneously realizing it was only day 2 of 5. I grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby Starbucks, exchanged pleasantries with Janet the barista who knows my order by heart, medium dark roast, 2 sugars, and a shot of "please let me survive another day in corporate purgatory," and prepared myself for another thrilling 8 hours of pretending to understand what "circle back" actually means in business speak. But as soon as I stepped into the main lobby, I could tell something was off. The usual morning calm had been replaced by what I can only describe as controlled corporate chaos, the kind where everyone looks busy and important while simultaneously having no idea what they're actually supposed to be doing. Executives were power walking across the marble floors like they were competing in some sort of business Olympics, their heels clicking out a frantic Morse code of panic. Interns were scurrying around with stacks of papers that were probably just copies of copies of copies, because that's what interns do. They make copies and fetch coffee and occasionally get blamed for things that are definitely not their fault. The whole scene reminded me of one of those nature documentaries where the camera captures an anthill that's been disturbed, except instead of ants, it was middle managers in ill-fitting suits carrying tablets and looking like they'd been mainlining espresso since 4 a.m. I watched a guy from accounting literally sprint past me toward the elevators, clutching a manila folder like it contained the nuclear codes, and I thought to myself, yep, just another Tuesday in paradise. Clara's department was buzzing with what I recognized as client panic. That special kind of controlled hysteria that happens when someone important is either very happy or very angry, and nobody knows which one it is yet. I could see her through the glass walls of the conference room, gesticulating at a whiteboard covered in charts and graphs that probably meant something crucial to someone who wasn't me. She looked like a general planning a military campaign, except instead of tanks and artillery, she was deploying PowerPoint slides and market research data. I was minding my own business, sipping my coffee and watching the corporate circus unfold, when I spotted him near the reception desk. An older gentleman in a navy blue suit that screamed quality. Not the kind of suit you buy off the rack at Men's Warehouse during their buy one, get one for your weird cousin sale, but the kind that probably cost more than I make in a month and was tailored by someone whose name ends in a vowel. Silver hair perfectly styled, sharp intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of posture that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room he entered. But here's the thing. This distinguished-looking gentleman was clearly frustrated as hell. He was standing in front of Madison, our receptionist, making hand gestures that were getting increasingly animated while she stared at him with the blank expression of someone trying to solve calculus using only finger paints. Madison's a sweet kid, don't get me wrong, but asking her to handle an unexpected communication challenge is like asking a goldfish to perform brain surgery. Technically possible, I guess, but not something you'd bet money on. The whole scene was like watching a really slow-motion train wreck. This guy was obviously trying to communicate something important. Madison was clearly out of her depth, and the entire lobby full of rushing executives and caffeinated interns were walking past them like they were invisible. It was like that old saying about how you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat service workers, except in this case. It was revealing how an entire company treats anyone who doesn't fit into their neat little corporate boxes. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, watching this dance of miscommunication unfold, and I felt this weird sense of déjà vu. Not because I'd seen this exact scenario before, but because I recognized the feeling of being overlooked, of being treated like you don't quite belong in the polished corporate world of marble floors and power suits. This guy was getting the Marcus Grant treatment, the polite but distant acknowledgement that says, "We see you, but we're not really sure what to do with you." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the office furniture with legs, watching someone else get the invisible treatment while surrounded by hundreds of people who were apparently too busy being important to notice that a fellow human being needed help. It was like watching myself from the outside, except this guy had better clothes and probably a more impressive resume. Madison kept glancing around nervously, probably hoping someone with actual authority would swoop in and rescue her from this linguistic puzzle she couldn't solve. A few people slowed down as they passed, gave the situation a curious glance, then continued on their way like they were watching street performers they didn't find particularly entertaining. One executive even made eye contact with the gentleman, gave him a polite nod that clearly meant sorry, not my problem, and kept walking toward the elevator bank. It was fascinating in the most depressing way possible. Here we were in the lobby of a communications company, a business literally built on the idea of connecting people and facilitating understanding, and nobody could be bothered to help one person communicate with another. It was like being at a restaurant where everyone's starving, but nobody wants to acknowledge that there's food right in front of them. The gentleman's frustration was becoming more obvious by the minute. His gestures were getting sharper, more urgent, and I could see the exact moment when he realized that Madison wasn't just taking her time to process what he was saying. She genuinely had no idea what he was trying to tell her. It was the look of someone who'd suddenly realized they were speaking a foreign language in their own country. And that's when it hit me. Those weren't just random frustrated gestures he was making. Those were signs. Real, actual, grammatically correct American Sign Language signs. This distinguished gentleman in his expensive suit wasn't just someone having communication difficulties. He was deaf, trying to navigate a hearing world that had apparently decided he was someone else's problem. I looked around the lobby again, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. All these important people rushing around. dealing with their corporate emergencies and quarterly reports, and whatever crisis had everyone's pants in a twist, and not one of them had bothered to consider that maybe their communication company should be able to communicate with everyone, not just people who could hear. It was like watching the most expensive, well-dressed version of incompetence I'd ever seen. You know that moment when your brain and your body have a serious disagreement about what you should do next? Like when you're standing at the edge of a diving board, and your brain is screaming, "This is a terrible idea," while your feet are already committed to the jump. That's exactly where I found myself, clutching my overpriced coffee and watching this communication disaster unfold in real time. The smart thing to do would have been to keep walking, mind my own business, head up to my cubicle, and spend the morning forwarding emails and pretending to understand what actionable insights means. After all, I'm just Marcus Grant, professional wallflower, whose biggest contribution to office life is knowing which elevator makes that weird grinding noise and should be avoided unless you enjoy the possibility of being trapped between floors with Kevin from HR, who only talks about his fantasy football team. But here's the thing about being invisible for 3 years. Sometimes you get tired of being see-through. Sometimes you look at a situation and think, you know what? Maybe today is the day I stop being furniture and start being a human being who can actually help another human being. So I did something that was either incredibly stupid or mildly heroic, depending on your perspective on workplace, social hierarchies, and the unwritten rules about staying in your lane. I walked over to the reception desk, my heart beating like I was approaching the gates of Mordor instead of helping someone ask a simple question. As I got closer, I could see the gentleman's signs more clearly, and let me tell you, his ASL was textbook perfect. Clean hand shapes, proper facial grammar, the kind of fluent signing that comes from years of practice, not someone who learned a few phrases from YouTube. He was asking for directions, trying to explain who he was looking for, growing more frustrated by the second as Madison continued to stare at him like he was performing an interpretive dance about quantum physics. I took a deep breath, approached the desk, and did something I'd never done at work before. I used my secret superpower. I signed, "Hello, can I help you?" The change in his expression was instantaneous and almost overwhelming. His face lit up like I'd just handed him a winning lottery ticket and told him his birthday was being declared a national holiday. His whole posture shifted from frustrated and defensive to relieved and grateful, and he signed back so quickly that I almost missed it. Thank God, someone who can understand me. Meanwhile, Madison was staring at me like I'd just started speaking in tongues or performing magic tricks with my hands. Her mouth was literally hanging open, and I could practically see the gears in her brain trying to process what was happening. "Marcus," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. "What are you? How did you? Are you talking to him with your hands?" "Yeah," I said, trying to play it cool like this was something I did every Tuesday morning instead of something I'd literally never done at work before. "He's asking if he can see someone. Give me a second to find out who." I turned back to the gentleman and signed. "Who are you looking for? Do you have an appointment?" He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, and signed back, "My son. I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping to surprise him. I know he's busy, but I was in the neighborhood. Here's where things got interesting. What's your son's name?" I asked, and when he fingerspelled the response, I nearly choked on my coffee. Because apparently, the universe has a sense of humor that's even more twisted than mine. "Michael." He spelled out carefully, and I felt my stomach drop into my shoes and possibly through the floor into the parking garage below. "Michael Hale. As in, CEO Michael Hale. As in, the guy who signs my paychecks and probably doesn't know I exist despite the fact that I've worked here for 3 years. As in, my wife's boss's boss's boss. The man at the very top of the corporate food chain. The guy who makes decisions that affect hundreds of employees while I make decisions about whether to eat my sandwich or my apple first during lunch break." I must have had some kind of expression on my face, because the gentleman, Mr. Hale, apparently, tilted his head and signed. "Is everything okay? Do you know my son?" Know him was a relative term. I knew of him the way peasants know of the king. From a respectful distance. Mostly through company newsletters and the occasional sighting in the elevator where I tried to look busy and important while secretly wondering if he could tell I was just some guy who happened to show up every day and collect a paycheck. But here's his dad, standing in our lobby like any other visitor, being completely ignored by everyone except me, the office ghost who finally found a reason to materialize. Yes, I know him. I signed back, which was technically true if you count working for the same company and occasionally breathing the same air as knowing someone. He's the CEO. Mr. Hale's eyebrows went up, and he signed, CEO? Wow. I knew he was doing well, but he paused, then continued, I haven't seen his office. I thought maybe I could take a look around, see where he works. Is that possible? Now, here's where any reasonable person would have immediately called security or at least found someone with actual authority to handle this situation. CEOs don't just get surprise visits from their dads, right? There are protocols and assistants and probably entire departments dedicated to managing who gets access to the executive floor. But looking at this man, this perfectly dressed, obviously intelligent, completely polite gentleman who just wanted to see where his successful son worked, I thought about all the times I'd wished my own dad could see me at work, could understand what I did all day, could be proud of me for something more substantial than remembering to take out the trash without being asked. Would you like me to show you around while we wait? I signed. I could give you a tour of the office. His face brightened even more, if that was possible. Would you? That would be wonderful. I don't want to be any trouble. Madison was still staring at us like we were performing some kind of elaborate mime routine. Marcus, she whispered, what's going on? Who is this guy? This is Mr. Hale, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He's here to see his son. I'm going to show him around a bit while you call up to Michael's office, okay? And that's how I found myself doing something I never thought I'd do at Titan Global. Being helpful, being competent, being the guy who could solve a problem instead of the guy who just watched other people solve problems while eating lunch alone in the break room. As we walked away from the reception desk, Mr. Hale signed, Thank you so much. I was starting to think I'd made a mistake coming here. No mistake. I signed back, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Welcome to Titan Global. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the weirdest, most life-changing Tuesday of my career. So there I was, about to give the CEO's father a tour of Titan Global, which was roughly equivalent to a janitor offering to show the Queen around Buckingham Palace. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally getting to play tour guide at a company where I'd spent 3 years being about as noticeable as elevator music, and my first client was the big boss's dad, who couldn't hear a word I was saying out loud. Mr. Hale. And yeah, I was definitely calling him Mr. Hale because, hey, CEO's dad seemed inappropriately casual, was looking around the lobby with the kind of curious interest that people get when they're seeing something completely new. It occurred to me that this might be his first time at his son's workplace, which seemed kind of sad when you think about it. I mean, my dad visited me at my college job at Radio Shack exactly once, spent 5 minutes asking why everything was so expensive, bought a pack of AA batteries, and left. But at least he showed up. This place is impressive, Mr. Hale signed as we started walking toward the elevator bank. Very modern. Very corporate. I laughed before I could stop myself. That's definitely one word for it. I signed back. Corporate is kind of our middle name around here. Well, that and synergy. We use that word a lot, usually in meetings where nobody's really sure what it means, but everyone nods like it's the secret to world peace. He chuckled, actually chuckled, and I realized that making jokes with the CEO's dad was probably not covered in any employee handbook I'd ever read. But hey, we were already way off script at this point, so why not lean into it? The elevator ride to the 3rd floor gave me a chance to really look at this guy and try to figure out what his deal was. Everything about him screamed class and success, the kind of understated wealth that doesn't need to prove itself with flashy logos or gold watches. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes were real leather, not the fake stuff they sell at discount stores that squeaks when you walk, and he had that confident posture that comes from being used to people taking you seriously. But here's what got me. He was genuinely curious about everything. Not in a judgy way, like he was evaluating the company's worth for some potential business deal, but in the way someone looks at their kid's science fair project. Interested, proud, maybe a little amazed that this thing they helped create had grown into something so much bigger than they'd expected. So what do you do here? He asked as we stepped off the elevator into the marketing department. Now, that's a loaded question when you're Marcus Grant, professional nobody. How do you explain to the CEO's father that your job is basically to exist in the background and occasionally know where the good staplers are kept? I work in communications. I signed, which was technically true and sounded way more impressive than I attend meetings where I take notes that nobody reads. Communications, he repeated, looking pleased. That's important work. Michael always said that good communication was the foundation of any successful business. I wanted to tell him that his son's version of good communication mostly involved sending emails marked urgent about things that definitely weren't urgent, but that seemed like the kind of honesty that could get me fired before lunch. Instead, I just nodded and signed. He's right. Communication is everything. We started the grand tour with the marketing department, where I could see Clara through the glass wall of the conference room, still gesturing at her whiteboard like she was conducting a symphony orchestra made entirely of pie charts and quarterly projections. A few people looked up as we passed, probably wondering why Marcus the Invisible was suddenly escorting some distinguished gentlemen around the office, but most were too busy staring at their computer screens and pretending to be productive. That's the marketing team, I signed, pointing through the glass. They're the ones who figure out how to convince people they need things they didn't know they wanted. Mr. Hale watched Clara for a moment, and I could see him taking in the controlled chaos of the meeting. She looks very passionate about her work, he signed. That's my wife, actually. I signed back and immediately regretted it because now I had to explain how someone like me ended up married to someone like Clara, which was a mystery I was still trying to solve myself. His eyebrows went up. Your wife works here too? That must be interesting. Interesting is one word for it, I replied. She's basically corporate royalty around here, and I'm more like corporate furniture. But it works somehow. He laughed again, and I was starting to realize that Mr. Hale had a sense of humor. Not the fake, polite chuckling you get from people who are just being nice, but genuine amusement. It was refreshing to meet someone in this building who could laugh at the absurdity of corporate life instead of taking it all so seriously. We continued the tour, and I found myself actually enjoying playing guide. I showed him the design department, where creative types tried to make boring things look exciting, and the break room, where everyone pretended the coffee was fine while secretly planning to bring their own from home. Mr. Hale was fascinated by everything, asking questions about what different departments did and how they all worked together. The coffee really is terrible, isn't it? He signed after taking a tentative sip from the pot I'd warned him about. It's like they're actively trying to punish us for being employed here. I signed back. I think they buy it in bulk from a company called Barely Coffee or Coffee-ish Substance, Incorporated. That got another genuine laugh, and I realized something weird was happening. I was actually having fun at work. When was the last time that had happened? Probably never, if I was being honest. We wandered through the cubicle maze where the accountants lived, past the conference rooms with their motivational posters about teamwork and innovation, and around the corner to where the copywriters sat, crafting marketing messages that would convince people to buy things they'd forget about within a week. Everyone seems very focused, Mr. Hale observed as we passed a particularly intense cluster of people staring at their monitors like they contained the secrets of the universe. Focused is a nice way to put it, I signed. I was going to say trapped in a cycle of corporate existential dread, but focused works too. The more we talked, the more I realized that Mr. Hale wasn't just making polite conversation. He was genuinely interested in understanding this world his son inhabited. He asked thoughtful questions about how different departments collaborated, what challenges the company faced, and what it was like to work in such a large organization. And here's the crazy part. I found myself giving him real answers. Not the sanitized, corporate-approved responses I'd give in a performance review, but honest observations about office dynamics and workplace culture and what it was really like to spend 40 hours a week in a building designed to make money while slowly killing your soul with fluorescent lighting and recycled air. By the time we made it back toward the lobby, I felt like I'd actually accomplished something meaningful for the first time in months. Not because I'd completed some important project or impressed anyone with my corporate skills, but because I'd helped someone understand a little piece of the world they were curious about. Thank you for this, Mr. Hale signed as we approached the reception desk again. This has been wonderful. You've been very kind. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wasn't just some random tour I was giving to kill time while waiting for the CEO to become available. This was a father trying to understand his son's life, and somehow I'd become the bridge between them. You know that creepy feeling you get when you're walking alone at night, and you suddenly become convinced that someone's following you? Or when you're in a crowded restaurant and you can't shake the sensation that someone at another table is staring at you while you're trying to eat your sandwich in peace. That's exactly what hit me somewhere between showing Mr. Hale the wall of Employee of the Month plaques. Spoiler alert. My face has never graced that particular hall of fame, and introducing him to the copywriting team, who were huddled around their computers like they were defusing a bomb instead of writing ad copy for laundry detergent. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. I mean, here I was, Marcus Grant the human wallpaper, suddenly playing tour guide to someone who was clearly important, having actual conversations with my hands while half the office pretended not to stare. Of course people were going to notice. It's not every day that the invisible guy starts doing sign language in the middle of the corporate jungle. I might as well have shown up to work riding a unicorn while juggling flaming batons. But this feeling was different. This wasn't the casual curiosity of coworkers wondering why the guy who usually blends into the office furniture was suddenly the center of attention. This was the kind of focused attention that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and your fight-or-flight response start warming up in the bullpen. I tried to ignore it at first, concentrating on translating Mr. Hale's questions about our company's workflow and trying to explain why we had 17 different types of staplers but only one working printer. But the sensation kept growing stronger, like someone was watching me through a microscope while I was trying to perform surgery with my hands tied behind my back. Then, while we were standing near the marketing department's break area and Mr. Hale was signing something about how impressed he was with the team's energy, I made the mistake of glancing up toward the mezzanine level. And that's when I saw him. Michael Hale, the CEO, the big kahuna. The guy whose signature was on my paychecks and whose face graced the leadership team section of our company website, looking appropriately serious and successful in a way that suggested he could solve world hunger before lunch and still have time to increase quarterly profits by 15%. He was standing at the railing of the mezzanine, perfectly still, looking down at us like some kind of corporate Batman surveying Gotham City from his perch high above the peasants. And when I say looking at us, I mean really looking. The kind of intense, focused stare that could probably melt steel if he concentrated hard enough. My stomach didn't just drop. It fell through the floor, applied for citizenship in China, and started a new life selling dumplings on the street. Because there's nothing quite like realizing that the most powerful person in your professional universe has been watching you give his father an unauthorized tour of the company while making jokes about the terrible coffee and the soul-crushing nature of corporate life. I tried to play it cool, which is like trying to juggle while riding a bicycle on a tightrope. Theoretically possible, but not recommended for people whose coordination peaks at successfully opening a bag of chips without spilling half of them on the floor. I gave a little wave, the kind of awkward gesture that screams, "Please don't fire me. I was just trying to be helpful." But Michael Hale didn't wave back. He just continued standing there, perfectly motionless, like a statue of corporate authority incarnate. Mr. Hale must have noticed my sudden change in demeanor because he tapped my shoulder and signed. "Is everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost." I signed back, trying to keep my hands steady despite the fact that my heart was beating like I'd just sprinted up 10 flights of stairs while carrying a desk. "Your son. He's upstairs, watching us." Mr. Hale's face immediately brightened, and he started looking around like a kid searching for his parents at a school play. "Where? Can you point him out?" This is where things got really surreal. Here I was, pointing up at the mezzanine level to show a father where his son was standing, while said son continued to stare down at us with the intensity of a hawk watching a particularly interesting mouse. It was like being in the middle of some weird corporate family drama where I was playing the role of unwitting mediator between two people who apparently had some serious communication issues of their own. "There," I signed, pointing up at the mezzanine. "The tall guy in the dark suit. That's Michael." Mr. Hale followed my gaze, and his whole face lit up when he spotted his son. He started waving enthusiastically, the kind of proud parent wave that says, "That's my boy." Even when your boy is a powerful executive who's probably wondering why his father is getting a tour from some random employee he's never noticed before. But here's the weird part. Michael Hale didn't wave back. He just stood there, still as a statue, watching his father wave at him with this expression that I couldn't quite read from 3 floors down. It wasn't angry, exactly, but it wasn't warm and fuzzy either. It was the kind of look you give someone when you're trying to figure out a puzzle that doesn't quite make sense. Meanwhile, Mr. Hale was still waving, his enthusiasm slowly deflating as he realized his son wasn't responding. The whole thing was starting to feel less like a heartwarming family reunion and more like watching someone try to get the attention of a person who was pretending not to see them. Maybe he's busy, I signed, trying to fill the awkward silence that was developing despite the fact that we were communicating without sound. You know how it is with executives. Always something urgent happening. But even as I said it, I could tell that Mr. Hale was disappointed. The excitement that had been radiating from him since we'd started the tour dimmed a little, like someone had turned down the brightness on his enthusiasm. He stopped waving and signed. Yes, I suppose he is very busy. I should have called ahead. The whole situation was making me incredibly uncomfortable, like being caught in the middle of someone else's family drama while wearing a name tag that said, "Hi, I'm the guy who accidentally made this weird." I found myself wishing I'd just minded my own business and headed straight to my cubicle like every other Tuesday morning for the past 3 years. But then something strange happened. As we continued standing there in this bizarre three-way staring contest, I noticed that Michael Hale wasn't just watching his father. He was watching me too. And not in the "who is this random employee and why is he talking to my dad?" way I'd expected, but with something that looked almost like curiosity, interest. It was hard to tell from that distance, but there was definitely something more complex going on behind those executive eyes than simple confusion. The whole thing felt like being an actor in a play where nobody had given me the script, and I was supposed to improvise my way through a scene that could either end with applause or with security escorting me to the parking lot with a cardboard box full of my personal belongings. After the whole awkward mezzanine staring contest situation, I figured the smart thing to do would be to wrap up this impromptu tour and get Mr. Hale to the reception desk, where someone with actual authority could handle whatever family reunion dynamics were playing out above my pay grade. But as we continued walking through the office, something shifted in Mr. Hale's demeanor. The enthusiastic curiosity he'd shown earlier was still there, but underneath it, I could sense something else brewing. The kind of emotional undercurrent that happens when someone has been holding something in for way too long and is finally ready to let it out. We were standing near the design department, watching a team of graphic artists debate the merits of serif versus sans serif fonts with the passion usually reserved for arguing about religion or whether pineapple belongs on pizza, when Mr. Hale suddenly signed something that caught me completely off guard. "Can I tell you something?" he signed, his expression more serious than it had been all morning. Something I probably shouldn't tell a stranger, but somehow feel like I need to say out loud, or out hand, I suppose. Now, here's the thing about being the office wallpaper for 3 years. You develop this weird ability to become a confidant for people who need someone safe to talk to. Maybe it's because I'm forgettable enough that people figure their secrets are safe with me. Or maybe it's because I've perfected the art of looking like I'm listening even when I'm mentally planning my grocery list. Either way, I've heard more personal confessions in break rooms and elevators than most therapists probably hear in their actual offices. But this felt different. This wasn't someone complaining about their workload or venting about office politics. This was a father who was clearly struggling with something much bigger and more complicated than quarterly reports or team-building exercises. Sure, I signed back, trying to look like the kind of person who could handle whatever emotional bomb was about to get dropped in the middle of a Tuesday morning office tour. "I'm listening. Or watching. You know what I mean." He smiled at my linguistic fumbling, but it was a sad smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes and carries the weight of years of accumulated disappointment. "I'm proud of my son," he began, his hands moving with the careful precision of someone who has thought about these words many times before. "Very proud. Look at this place. Look at what he's built. When he was young, I used to worry that he was too quiet, too focused on his studies. I thought maybe he needed to get out more, make more friends, learn how to just be a kid sometimes." I nodded, thinking about my own relationship with my dad, who had never quite figured out what to make of me either. My father was a mechanic who could rebuild an engine with his eyes closed, but had no idea what to do with a son who preferred books to carburetors and whose idea of fixing something involved calling someone else to come fix it. "Now look at him," Mr. Hale continued, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling where his son had been standing like a corporate surveillance statue. "He's successful beyond anything I could have imagined. He runs this whole company, makes decisions that affect hundreds of people, Probably earns more in a month than I made in some years when he was growing up. There was a pause, and I could see him gathering himself to say whatever was really on his mind. It's funny how you can tell when someone is about to get to the heart of something important, even when they're communicating with their hands. There's a shift in body language, a moment of internal preparation before they dive into the deep water. But I feel like I've lost him. He signed, and there it was, the real issue hiding underneath all the pride and admiration. He's so busy being successful, so focused on running this empire he's created, that I'm not sure he remembers how to just be my son anymore. Oh man, that hit me right in the gut, partially because it reminded me of my own family dynamics, but mostly because I could see the genuine pain behind his words. Here was this distinguished gentleman in his expensive suit, talking about feeling disconnected from the person who was probably the most important thing in his life, and I'm standing there in my off-the-rack tie thinking about how families are basically the most complicated puzzles ever invented. When's the last time you two just hung out? I asked, immediately realizing how inadequate that question was. You don't just hang out with CEOs, even if they're your kids. Years, he signed, and the simplicity of that answer made it even more heartbreaking. We talk on holidays, exchange cards, send text messages about family events. But when's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time he asked me about my life, or told me about his life beyond the official updates about company performance and business achievements? I thought about my own dad, who called me every few weeks to ask if my car was making any weird noises and to tell me about whatever home improvement project was currently defeating him. Those conversations lasted maybe 5 minutes and consisted mostly of him giving me advice about oil changes and me pretending I knew what he was talking about. But at least we had them. He seems like he cares about you. I offered, though even as I signed it, I realized how lame that sounded. I mean, he was watching you pretty intently from up there. Mr. Hale's expression softened a little. I hope so. I really do. But sometimes I think he sees me as just another obligation on his calendar, another item to check off his list of things successful people are supposed to maintain. Visit dad, check. Send birthday card, check. Invite to company holiday party, check. We started walking again, past the accounting department where people were hunched over spreadsheets like ancient scholars studying sacred texts, and I found myself thinking about how weird it was that success could sometimes create distance between people instead of bringing them closer together. Here was Michael Hale, probably one of the most accomplished people in the city, and his biggest failure might be that he'd forgotten how to have a normal relationship with his own father. I miss him, Mr. Hale continued, his signing becoming more animated as he warmed to the subject. I miss the kid who used to get excited about science projects and would spend hours telling me about whatever book he was reading. I miss the teenager who had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to argue with me about politics or sports or whether we should get a dog. Did you ever get the dog? I asked, partly because I was curious and partly because I wanted to lighten the mood a little. Golden retriever named Einstein. He signed with his first genuine smile since this conversation started. Michael loved that dog more than anything. Taught him tricks, took him everywhere, cried for a week when Einstein died during his sophomore year of college. And there it was. A glimpse of the son he missed, the person who existed underneath all the corporate success and executive responsibility. It made me think about Clara and how sometimes I felt like I was married to her ambition as much as I was married to her, like the person I fell in love with was still in there somewhere, but had gotten buried under layers of professional achievement and career goals. Maybe he's still in there. I signed, surprising myself with how earnest I sounded. Maybe he just forgot how to let that part of himself show at work. You know how it is in corporate America. Everything's about being professional and maintaining your image and never letting anyone see that you're actually human underneath the suit. Mr. Hale looked at me with something that might have been hope mixed with skepticism. You really think so? I don't know, I admitted. But I'd like to think so. Because if guys like your son can't figure out how to stay connected to the people who love them, what hope do the rest of us have? By the time we made it back to the lobby, I was feeling pretty good about myself. Not employee of the month good, but hey, I actually helped someone today instead of just forwarding emails and pretending to understand what leverage our core competencies means good. Mr. Hale seemed more relaxed after our conversation, like talking about his son had somehow lifted a weight off his shoulders, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd managed to do something meaningful without completely screwing it up. That feeling lasted approximately 37 seconds. Because as soon as we approached the reception desk where Madison was still looking like someone had asked her to solve calculus using only interpretive dance, I spotted Margaret Morrison marching toward us with the kind of purposeful stride that usually means someone's about to get fired, demoted, or forced to attend a mandatory seminar about proper coffee room etiquette. Margaret is what you might call a supervisor's supervisor, one of those middle management types who carries a clipboard like it's a weapon of mass destruction and has perfected the art of making people feel guilty for things they didn't even know they'd done wrong. She's the kind of person who sends emails marked urgent about updating your emergency contact information and somehow makes you feel like you've personally disappointed the entire company by taking too long to respond. She was wearing her standard-issue power suit, the navy blue one that screams, "I take myself very seriously, and you should too," and carrying her clipboard of doom like she was about to conduct an inspection of our souls. Her expression was the perfect blend of professional concern and barely contained irritation, which in Margaret speak usually translates to someone is about to have a very bad day. "Marcus," she said, her voice pitched at that special frequency that could cut through steel. "I need to speak with you immediately." Now, here's where my brain went into full panic mode. Because being called out by Margaret Morrison in the middle of the lobby, in front of the CEO's father, while half the company was watching through glass walls, was basically the corporate equivalent of being called to the principal's office over the school intercom. Everyone would know that Marcus Grant, professional nobody, had finally screwed up badly enough to warrant public execution. I could already picture the conversation. "Marcus, we appreciate your enthusiasm in helping our visitors, but conducting unauthorized tours of company facilities while making jokes about our coffee and discussing sensitive workplace dynamics is not appropriate behavior for someone in your position." Translation: pack your sad little box of personal belongings and don't let the door hit you on the way out. Mr. Hale must have sensed the tension because he looked between Margaret and me with the expression of someone who was starting to realize he might have gotten an innocent person into serious trouble. His face went from relaxed and grateful to concerned and slightly guilty, like he was calculating how much damage his impromptu tour request might have caused to my continued employment. "Actually," came a voice from behind us, and I swear to God, my heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. Because that voice belonged to Michael Hale, CEO and supreme overlord of everything that paid my rent. I turned around, and there he was, tall, imposing, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, and looking like the kind of person who could fire people with a single raised eyebrow. He'd materialized in the lobby like some kind of corporate ninja, moving so quietly that nobody had noticed him approaching until he was already there, which was honestly kind of terrifying. "Actually," he repeated, walking past me toward Margaret with the kind of confident stride that comes from being the guy who signs everyone else's paychecks. "I need to talk to Marcus first." Margaret's expression immediately shifted from ready to destroy someone's career to, "Oh shit, the actual boss is here," which would have been funny if I wasn't too busy having what might have been a minor heart attack. She clutched her clipboard like it was a life preserver and took a step back, suddenly looking like a middle schooler who'd been caught passing notes in class. "Of course, Mr. Hale," she said, her voice instantly transforming from drill sergeant to obsequious subordinate. I wanted to make sure that, well, I noticed Marcus was." "Thank you, Margaret," Michael said, cutting her off with the kind of polite dismissal that somehow managed to be both courteous and final. "I'll handle this." And that's when the most surreal thing happened. Michael Hale, CEO, corporate titan, the guy whose picture was probably hanging in some business school hall of fame, looked directly at his father and started signing. I'm not kidding. He actually started signing. Slowly, carefully, like someone who was rusty but determined, his hands formed the words, "Hi, Dad. Sorry I didn't come down sooner. I was surprised to see you here." The entire lobby went dead silent. And I mean dead silent, like someone had hit the mute button on the entire corporate universe. People stopped walking, stopped talking, stopped pretending to be busy with their phones. Madison's mouth fell open, so wide I was worried she might dislocate her jaw. Margaret's clipboard actually slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the marble floor with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. But Mr. Hale's reaction was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. His face went through about 17 different emotions in the space of 2 seconds. Surprise, joy, disbelief, hope, and something that might have been relief all rolled into one expression that was so pure and genuine it made my throat tighten up. "You remember," he signed back, his hands moving faster now, more fluid. "You still remember how to sign." "I've been practicing," Michael admitted, his own signing becoming more confident as he warmed up. I wanted to surprise you. I wasn't sure when, but I've been taking lessons again." And then, "I swear this actually happened," they hugged. Right there in the middle of the Titan Global lobby, surrounded by probably 50 people who were all pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. The CEO and his father had the kind of emotional reunion that usually only happens in movies about dysfunctional families finding their way back to each other. The entire lobby erupted in spontaneous applause. I'm talking full-on standing ovation, like we'd just witnessed the most heartwarming corporate family drama in the history of business. People were actually wiping their eyes, and I saw at least 3 interns taking pictures with their phones, probably already planning their social media posts about the most amazing thing that happened at work today. Margaret picked up her clipboard and started clapping too, though she still looked like someone who'd just watched the laws of corporate physics get completely rewritten. Madison was crying, actually crying, and making little happy squeaking noises that sounded like a dolphin experiencing pure joy. And me? I just stood there thinking 2 things. First, that I just witnessed something genuinely beautiful and meaningful. And second, that I was definitely getting fired after this standing ovation ended. Because let's be real, when you're Marcus Grant, professional background character, and you accidentally become the catalyst for the CEO's emotional breakthrough with his father in front of the entire company, there's really only one way that story can end. And it probably involves updating my resume and figuring out how to explain this whole situation in future job interviews. "So, about that conversation you wanted to have with me," I said to Michael, trying to sound casual while internally preparing for the most awkward termination meeting in corporate history. But instead of the clean out your desk speech I was expecting, Michael Hale just smiled. Actually smiled, and said something that made me question whether I was still on the same planet I'd woken up on that morning. So there I was, standing in the lobby of Titan Global, watching the CEO hug his father while the entire company applauded like we were at some kind of corporate Broadway show, and all I could think was, well, this is definitely going to be an interesting conversation with HR. Because let's face it, when you're Marcus Grant and you accidentally become the star of the most emotionally charged workplace drama in company history, the smart money is on updating your LinkedIn profile and practicing your "it seemed like a good idea at the time" speech. Michael Hale released his father from what had to be the most public family reunion in the history of business, straightened his tie with the kind of casual confidence that comes from being used to having hundreds of people watch your every move, and turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't angry, which was good, but it wasn't exactly friendly either, which was concerning. It was more like curious, analytical, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that had suddenly appeared in his normally predictable corporate universe. "Marcus," he said, and hearing the CEO say my actual name instead of just nodding vaguely in my direction was surreal enough to make me wonder if I was having some kind of caffeine-induced hallucination. "Would you mind coming up to my office? I'd like to talk with you about what happened here today." Now, in the movies, this is where the background character gets his big break and discovers that he's actually the chosen one who was destined for greatness all along. In real life, this is usually where the background character gets a very polite explanation about how his services are no longer required and a gift card to Olive Garden as a consolation prize. "Of course," I said, trying to sound professional and composed while internally screaming like someone who'd just been told they were about to get a root canal from a dentist who learned his skills from YouTube videos. Should I bring anything? Like my resignation letter? Or a box for my stuff? Or maybe a lawyer?" Michael actually smiled at that, which was either a good sign or the kind of smile sharks give to fish right before lunch. "Just bring yourself, Marcus." And maybe that sense of humor. The elevator ride to the executive floor was the longest 30 seconds of my professional life. I stood there watching the numbers climb, 10, 11, 12, while trying to figure out if I should start mentally composing my "what I did during my brief career at Titan Global" memoir or if there was still a chance this conversation would end with me still being employed by Friday. Michael's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who probably makes more money in a day than I make in 6 months. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that made the city look like a model train set. Furniture that was probably handcrafted by artisans who charged more for a chair than most people spend on a car, and the kind of massive desk that was clearly designed to make visitors feel small and intimidated. But here's the weird thing. Instead of sitting behind that intimidating desk like some kind of corporate emperor holding court, Michael gestured to a couple of comfortable chairs near the windows, like we were just two guys about to have a casual conversation about the weather or our weekend plans. "Sit down, Marcus," he said, and I swear he was still smiling. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Oh great. This was it. This was where he asked me why I thought it was appropriate to give unauthorized tours to random visitors, or why I felt comfortable discussing company culture with someone I'd just met, or why I'd apparently inserted myself into his family drama like some kind of workplace therapist with a communications degree. "Okay," I said, settling into a chair that was more comfortable than my entire living room and probably cost more than my car. "I'll be honest, but just so we're clear, I was genuinely trying to help, and I had no idea who your father was when I started talking to him. I mean, I figured it out pretty quickly, obviously, but at first I just thought he was some guy who needed directions and—" "Marcus," Michael interrupted, and I realized I was rambling like someone who'd had too much coffee and not enough sleep. "That's not what I want to ask you about." He leaned forward in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known of his existence, he looked less like a CEO and more like a regular person who was trying to work through something complicated. "I want to know how you learned to sign so well. And more importantly, I want to know if you'd be interested in helping me fix something I should have fixed a long time ago." "Wait, what?" "I'm sorry," I said, because clearly I'd misheard him or maybe had a small stroke during the elevator ride. Are you offering me something?" Because I was pretty sure this conversation was going to end with me being escorted out by security and a very awkward explanation to my wife about why I was suddenly unemployed. Michael laughed, actually laughed, and it was the kind of genuine sound that made him seem less like an intimidating business mogul and more like someone's dad who happened to run a company. "No, Marcus, I'm not firing you. In fact, I'm wondering if you'd be interested in a promotion." I stared at him for approximately 10 seconds, waiting for the punchline or the hidden camera crew, or maybe just for my brain to start processing information again. "A promotion," I repeated slowly, like I was testing out a foreign word I'd never heard before. "To what? Professional tour guide? Corporate translator? Director of accidental family reunions? Director of accessibility and inclusion," he said, and I could tell he wasn't kidding. "It's a new position. I've been thinking about creating it for months, but today made me realize how urgently we need it." I laughed, out loud, like actually laughed at the CEO while sitting in his ridiculously expensive office chair. "You're serious?" I said when I realized he wasn't laughing with me. "You're actually serious about this?" "Dead serious," he confirmed. "Marcus, do you have any idea how many businesses in this country are completely unprepared to serve customers or work with employees who have disabilities? Do you know how many lawsuits companies face every year because they never bothered to think about accessibility until it was too late?" I shook my head, mostly because I was still trying to process the fact that we were having this conversation at all. "A lot," he continued. "And more importantly, do you know how many talented people we're probably missing out on hiring because we've never made the effort to be truly inclusive? Today, watching you communicate with my father, seeing how natural and comfortable you made him feel in an environment that could have been completely isolating, that opened my eyes to something I should have seen years ago." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city like he was seeing it from a completely new perspective. "I want you to help me turn Titan Global into a company that doesn't just talk about diversity and inclusion in our mission statement, but actually lives it. I want you to help me build something that my father can be proud of, something that serves everyone in our community, not just the people who fit into our narrow definition of normal." I sat there in that expensive chair, trying to wrap my head around the fact that my morning had started with me being invisible office furniture and was apparently ending with a job offer that sounded like something that actually mattered. "And you want me to do this because I can sign?" I asked. "I want you to do this because you saw someone who needed help and you helped them," Michael said, turning back to face me. Because you have empathy, because you have skills that we desperately need, and because you had the guts to do the right thing even when you thought it might get you in trouble." He paused, then added with a smile that made him look less like a CEO and more like the kid his father had told me about. "And yes, because you can sign. But mostly because you reminded me what it means to actually give a damn about people instead of just talking about it in board meetings." I thought about Clara, about how she was going to react when I told her that her husband, the guy she'd married despite his apparent lack of ambition, had just been offered a director-level position by her ultimate boss. I thought about Mr. Hale and how proud he'd looked when his son started signing. I thought about all the times I'd felt invisible and unimportant and wondered if maybe, just maybe, I'd been invisible because I'd been waiting for the right moment to matter. "Okay," I said, and it came out as barely a whisper because I was afraid that speaking too loudly might break whatever spell was making this impossible conversation possible. "Okay, yes, I'd like to try." And that's how Marcus Grant, professional nobody, became Marcus Grant, Director of Accessibility and Inclusion, in the span of a single Tuesday morning that had started with terrible coffee and ended with the best job interview I'd never known I was having. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office. Yes, an actual office with walls and a door and everything, trying to process how dramatically my life had changed since that Tuesday morning when I decided to help a stranger in the lobby. The office wasn't as fancy as Michael's penthouse suite, but it had a window, a real desk instead of a cubicle, and most importantly, a nameplate that read Marcus Grant, Director of Accessibility and Inclusion, in letters that were big enough to be seen from space. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, obviously. There had been meetings with HR about my new role, conversations with legal about compliance requirements, and about 17 different training sessions where I learned the difference between accommodation and modification and why both were crucial for creating an inclusive workplace. But the weirdest part wasn't learning the corporate side of accessibility. It was watching how differently people treated me now that I had a title that actually meant something. Suddenly, Marcus Grant wasn't just the guy who knew where the good staplers were kept. I was the guy who knew about ADA compliance and universal design principles and could explain why our company website needed alt text for images in a way that didn't make people's eyes glaze over. I was the guy who got invited to important meetings and asked for my opinion on things that mattered, instead of just being the guy who took notes that nobody ever read. The first major project Michael had given me was installing visual alert systems throughout the building, flashing lights that would activate along with fire alarms and other emergency signals so that deaf and hard-of-hearing employees wouldn't be left out of crucial safety communications. It sounds like a simple thing, right? But watching the installation team put up those lights, knowing that they could literally save someone's life, made me feel like I was actually contributing something meaningful to the world instead of just shuffling papers and attending meetings about meetings. Then came the sign language workshops. Every month, I taught basic ASL classes in the main conference room to any employee who wanted to learn. The turnout was incredible, way higher than anyone had expected. We had accountants learning to fingerspell their names, marketing executives practicing how to sign please and thank you. And even Margaret Morrison showed up one Tuesday afternoon, clipboard in hand, ready to learn how to communicate with the deaf community. The best part was watching people's faces when they realized how expressive and beautiful sign language could be. There's something magical about that moment when someone successfully signs their first complete sentence and realizes they've just learned to communicate in a completely different way. It reminded me why I'd fallen in love with ASL in the first place, back when I was just a teenager trying to talk to my cousin Leo. Speaking of Leo, he'd become a regular visitor to the office. I'd hired him as a consultant for our accessibility initiatives, partly because he was brilliant at identifying potential barriers that hearing people like me might miss, and partly because it was amazing to watch him interact with our employees. Leo had this way of making everyone feel comfortable about asking questions, even the ones that might seem obvious or potentially insensitive. He'd answer anything with patience and humor, turning what could have been awkward encounters into genuine learning experiences. The ripple effects were bigger than I'd ever imagined. Word about our accessibility programs spread throughout the business community, and suddenly other companies were calling to ask how we'd implemented our initiatives. I found myself giving presentations at conferences. Me, Marcus Grant, standing in front of hundreds of business professionals, talking about universal design and inclusive hiring practices like I actually knew what I was talking about. Clara's reaction to my transformation had been interesting. At first, she'd been proud but slightly bewildered, like she was married to someone who'd suddenly revealed he could speak fluent Mandarin or juggle flaming torches. "I always knew you were smart," she told me after my first week in the new position, "but I never realized you were this smart." It was a backhanded compliment wrapped in genuine affection, which was pretty much our relationship in a nutshell. But as the months went by and she saw how passionate I was about the work, how energized I became when I talked about accessibility projects and inclusion initiatives, something shifted between us. We started having real conversations again, the kind we used to have when we were dating and staying up late talking about our dreams and plans for the future. She began asking me about my day not just out of politeness, but because she was genuinely interested in what I was doing. The biggest change, though, was in my relationship with Michael and his father. Robert Hale had become a regular fixture at Titan Global, not just as the CEO's dad making occasional visits, but as an unofficial advisor for our accessibility programs. He had insights about the deaf community that I'd never considered, stories about barriers he'd encountered that helped us identify problems we hadn't even thought to look for. Michael and Robert started having lunch together once a week. Actual lunch, not just quick coffee meetings squeezed between board calls. I'd see them sometimes in the executive dining room, signing and laughing like they were making up for years of missed conversations. Michael's ASL skills improved dramatically over those months, and watching their relationship heal was like witnessing a master class in the power of communication. The real test came when we decided to host our first annual Accessibility Awareness Day. It was my baby, my chance to showcase everything we'd built and learned over the past 6 months. We invited the whole community, deaf organizations, disability rights groups, other businesses interested in learning about inclusion. I'd planned workshops, demonstrations, panel discussions, and a reception where people could practice their sign language skills in a relaxed, social setting. The night before the event, I was standing in the main conference room, looking at the setup and trying not to panic about everything that could go wrong, when Michael walked in. "Nervous?" he asked, and I realized he'd signed the question instead of speaking it. His ASL had gotten so much better that he sometimes signed without even thinking about it now. Terrified, I signed back honestly. What if nobody shows up? What if the whole thing is a disaster? What if I've completely misjudged what people want to learn about accessibility? Michael smiled and signed something that his father had probably told him years ago. The only real failure is not trying at all. The next morning, the lobby was packed. We had over 300 people show up, employees, community members, business leaders, students from the local college's ASL program. I gave the opening presentation, standing at a podium in front of more people than I'd ever addressed in my life, talking about how accessibility wasn't just about compliance or avoiding lawsuits, but about creating workplaces and communities where everyone could contribute their talents. "I used to be invisible in this company," I said, looking out at the crowd and spotting Clara in the third row, beaming at me like I'd just won the Nobel Prize. Not because people were mean to me, but because I hadn't found my way to contribute something that mattered. The beautiful thing about accessibility work is that it's not just about helping people with disabilities. It's about creating environments where everyone's unique skills and perspectives can shine. The applause was thunderous, but the best part was seeing Robert and Michael in the front row, signing their approval while everyone else clapped. After years of feeling like a background character in my own life, I'd finally found my starring role. And it all started with saying hello with my hands.